Dear brothers and sisters, I want to start today with a hypothetical scenario, with a hypothetical question, and I want to see how we think about this concept, and then we'll go into the content of the khutbah. So, let's say that hypothetically we have in our savings account, we have $10,000 in our bank, right? We have 2 cars, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with a nice home with, multi-floors. So you have a second floor, a first floor, and a basement. And alhamdulillah, gave you a family and a job, and you're in a situation where you're well off, right? You're comfortable. You're comfortable financially, you're comfortable with your work, and you're comfortable in this life. And someone comes to you and says, I'm new to this city, I don't have a job, I'm looking for a job but I can't find a job, and I'm in a situation where it's really hard for me to support my family and I need your help. Think about this scenario and think about how much would you afford to help that individual or that family. Would you think in terms of, I will give you some food, I will help you with some of the basic essentials. Would you take it to where you offer him or offer that family to stay in your house, right? So let's say you have a furnished basement, so you say, okay, so I'm going to give you my basement to stay in, you and your family. Would you go to the extent of offering them one of your 2 cars? So you can say, you know what? Me, my wife, and kids will manage in 1 car, and then you, your wife, and children, you guys can manage with the other car. Would you even go to the extent of saying, you know what? I have 10,000, here is 5, here is a car, here is my basement, you can have half of what I have. Right? So those are the things that we have to think about. And believe it or not, the companions of all the stories that we know, when the companions of the Prophet ﷺ went from Mecca to Medina, the people of Medina offered them half of what they had. So they went into that same exact situation. Those who had wealth, they shared half of their wealth. If they had multiple homes, they said, you know what? Here, you can have my house to live in. So that mentality didn't come from vacuum. The mentality and the will to say, I'm going to share what I have with you, didn't just exist overnight. We also know the story of the individuals that were hurt in a battle and they were really thirsty to the verge of dying, and someone came to them with water and they kept, just passing it from one to the other and saying, no, this guy next to me is needing it more. He's more thirsty than I am, pass it over to him. So as they keep passing it from one to the other without drinking, they all end up passing away because they wanted to sacrifice what they had and give it to those who believed were in more need than they were. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-A'raf verses 31, He says, يَا بَنِي آدَمَ خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. Very basic, very simple. He says, eat and drink, use your essentials. And then he says, do not waste. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like those who waste. So when we look at this concept of wasting, what is wasting? And why do we waste? And there's a huge debate, and people will argue and debate of what's wasting, right? Some people will say, well, I'm not really wasting. I'm using my basic essential living or standards of living, right? They look at how can I, because when we go back, let's take this a step back and look at, for example, cars, for example. People will justify the need to get a new car just because the one that they had is old. or the one that they had issues, or the one that they had wasn't new enough anymore. They needed to upgrade to a newer car. Or all what it was, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed them with a higher salary. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed them with a little bit more of income. So they decided that, you know what, now I just need to increase my standards of living. Now I need to increase how I spend that money. So we tend to renew our cars on a much frequent basis than needed. We tend to renew the furniture. We tend to renew our clothes. We tend to just renew everything that we have just because we can financially afford it. Not because we need it. And that raises the question, do we fall into the definition of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ, that we have become those who are wasteful. And from one person to the other, this wastefulness changes, right? Depending on how much money you have, how much financial support you have, determines how wasteful you are. Some people are wasteful when it comes to food. They just tend to throw away whatever is left on their plate. They look at it, they eat half of their plate. They feel like, okay, I'm full, I really don't need it. They don't bother to save it for later. They don't bother to just put in their plate enough for what they can eat, but rather they just don't bother anymore because they know there's more coming. They know if they get hungry, worst case scenario, they'll go out and eat, and food is ready for them. So how can we transition from a state of mind that teaches us how to be wasteful into a state of mind that gives us this ability to sacrifice and the ability to give what we have to others without having to think twice about it? Because that's the key factor here of trying to understand, how can I afford to give what I have? How can I justify in my mind that I need to give from what I have? Not just my access, not anything that just, I have in excess, right? But the stuff that I have and I may want, not need, but want. We all want new clothes frequently, right? We all want new shoes. We all want all of those great things. But do we have individuals who need it rather than just want it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Hashr verses 9, He explains, this story that we talked about when He says, وَالَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارَ وَالْإِيمَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ حَاجَةً مِمَّا أُوتُوا وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is explaining to us that, there are a group of people, there are a group of individuals who are always ready and waiting to receive and provide help for anyone that comes their way. And He says one of the features of those individuals is that despite their love for what they're about to give, they still give it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another verse, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. Despite their love for food, they still give it to those who need it, those who need it most. So for us to get into that state of mind, we have to go back to the basics of this life. What is the purpose of us on this life? And this span that we're living in, the 50 years, the 40 years, the 30 years, the 80 years, however long we're going to live in this life, what is my purpose here? Right? Is my purpose to become wealthy? Is my purpose to have the biggest house in the neighborhood? Is my goal to become the richest Muslim in Cincinnati, or the richest Muslim in Ohio, or the richest Muslim ever? What is my purpose? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish in this dunya? And then it really, in theory, it should come down to one thing. Our goal in this dunya should come down to one thing, which is how can I use this dunya, how can I use this life to get into paradise? This life should be nothing more than my gateway into paradise. So now I start prioritizing and ranking all of these different elements that I run into. How much is, clothing worth for me? Right? Because our money is limited. So my income is $2,000 a month, my income is $3,000 a month, my income is $100,000 a month. Whatever that income is, it's an income that I receive and I have to spend. So I either spend all of it for pleasures that will give me happiness in this dunya, or I invested in things that will give me the return in the hereafter. Right? So if we take this $10,000 a month income for just simplicity of math, if I take $10,000 income, and after paying my rent, after paying my basic needs, I end up with an X amount of dollars. Right? How do I invest this? How do I use this money to where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can look at me in the day of judgment and say, you have done what you can. And if you think you don't have money to help others, you're wrong. No matter how much your income is, no matter how much money you make, think about what things you can let go and what things you can do to help those who are in need. And again, the help doesn't have to be financial. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave every single one of us a way to use to get into the hereafter. In a hadith, some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ went to them, and those were guys that weren't financially well off. So these guys didn't have a lot of money. So they said, "O Prophet of Allah, those who are wealthy do the same acts of worship as we do." Right? So they pray, they fast, they make hajj if they're able to. But yet, they have money to give as a sadaqah. They have money to donate. So those people, they felt that, okay, so these guys are better than us because they do the same acts of worship, but yet they donate money. And the Prophet ﷺ gave him a very simple answer. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you a lot of things that you can do as a form of charity. He said, helping others is a form of charity. Helping those who are in need is a form of charity. He said, as simple as saying or seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness is a form of charity. So we really have to think, our problem these days is that we're stuck in a single mentality of there's only one way to get you into paradise. And that is completely wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us plenty of venues that will get us into paradise. And one of those, as we were talking about today, is for you to let go for the love of this dunya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Imran verses 92, He says, لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون وما تنفقوا من شيء فإن الله به عليم. He said, you'll not reach al-birr, and we'll talk about the definition of birr. He said, you will not reach this birr until you spend from what you love. He didn't say until you spend all of your money. He didn't say until you spend, X amount of things. He said, until you spend from what's dear to your heart. And then he says, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows of everything that you spend. So again, spending does not have to be financial. Spending does not have to be in a monetary form. Spending, to reach this righteousness, is you have to spend from what you love. And in a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ defines this birr. And he says, al-birru husnul khuluq. He says this righteousness or birr is having this good mannerism, having this good characteristic. And then in another one he says, al-birru matma'annat ilayhi al-nafs wa matma'anna ilayhi al-qalb. He says al-birr is what your heart feels comfortable with, what sits well into your heart. And we all have been into situations where people are telling us, you need to do this. And people think that this is the right way, but deep inside of your heart, you know this is wrong. But yet we do it. So this is what really needs to be our gauge, is that what is my purpose in this life? Can I spend from what I love? And that's why my solution only fits me, because I know me. I know what I love. I know what's dear to my heart. Just like every single one of you know exactly what you guys love. So we all have to look deep into our hearts and decide, what is it that I love? What is it that I can spend despite my love for that thing? If my love is time, if what I love is me getting off of work and going home and sitting down on the couch and doing nothing, if this is what I love to do Monday through Friday, then that's what I should focus on spending for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I should take some of that time and look around my community. What does my community need? Our local masajid need plenty of volunteer hours. Our local community centers need a lot of volunteer hours. If that's something you can afford, go for it. Let that be the motivation. Don't let the excuse of, I really don't have much money to afford, I don't have much money, I have a lot of expenses, or I have this, or I have that. These are all excuses that we give one another. These are all excuses that our mind and hearts are justifying for us. There's two things I want you to keep in mind today, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا بني آدم خذوا زينتكم عند كل مسجد وكلوا واشربوا ولا تسرفوا إنه لا يحب المسرفين. Use as much as you need, but then don't waste. And just keep in mind that the justification of what you need is something you have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can all sit here and justify that that's why I need this house, that's why I need this car, that's why I need to dress this, in this fashion, and that's why I need to do all of those things. But at the end of the day, we have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and justify why I did what I did. So when you're trying to justify how you're not becoming wasteful, keep in mind that you don't have to answer to me or anybody else around you. You have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the day. You can fool me and you can fool everybody around you. You can make anybody around you think that you're the most righteous person ever. At the end of the day, we all have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second point I want you to keep in mind is, as we said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will not reach this state of righteousness, the state of comfort in the heart, until you spend from what you love. And what you love is in your heart. And only you know what's in your heart. only you can say, Ya Allah, I love this, and I'm taking from this, spending it for your sake. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says very clear in the same ayah, He said, وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. Whatever it is that you spend, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows about it. And again, spending does not mean financial spending, does not mean you just have to donate. It's great, we all need donation, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, the community is made up of the people in this room and the people in every masjid around us. We are complete because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave every single one of us an ability that would make this community complete. Our problem is that we tend to just become greedy and just limit what we're offering. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave some of us knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave some of us skills. He gave some of us financial wealthness. Gave us a lot of things that individually may not make an impact, but as a group, that's how we make a complete community. So I want you to think, how can I dig deep inside and see what is it that I love that's of use to my community and spend from that.